I was standing at the teller window of the small local credit union, the kind where everyone knew everyone's business whether they meant to or not. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead. It smelled faintly of carpet cleaner and winter coats damp from the rain. In my hand was a check, cream-colored, embossed, and trembling ever so slightly between my fingers. Not from nerves. Not anymore. I had moved past nerves into something colder, sharper. The teller, a young man with delicate eyebrows and the cautious politeness people reserve for older women, held the check in both hands. He inspected it, then looked at me, then inspected it again. "This is quite an amount, Ms. Hale." "Yes," I said, keeping my voice level. "Go ahead and deposit it." He nodded, tapped at his keyboard, and I could see the exact moment the transaction went through. His eyes flicked to the screen, widened barely, and then softened back into neutrality. "All right. Funds will be available immediately." Immediately. The irony almost made me laugh. I slipped the receipt into my coat pocket. Outside the windows, the gray sky hung low like it was listening. I pushed through the double doors and inhaled the crisp air, letting it settle into my chest. The town was quiet at that hour, the late afternoon lull between school buses and dinner tables. My boots echoed on the sidewalk. Every step carried the weight of everything that had come before. Months of accusations, of whispered judgments, of his parents' voices dripping with contempt. And now this check. Their signature. Their oversight. Their mistake. A settlement drafted by their own attorney. A number they had read, reviewed, and initialed. They had insisted on handling the negotiations themselves to protect their son. They had refused to speak with me directly. Refused to consider the truth. And in their righteous fury, they had failed to realize the clause they demanded actually gave me more than they ever intended to concede. I hadn't tricked them. I hadn't deceived a soul. I had simply stood back while they dug their own hole with a silver-plated shovel. As I rounded the corner toward my car, my phone buzzed. A text from an unfamiliar number. "We need to talk. Call us immediately. This is urgent. The Whitmans." I stopped walking. The wind lifted the ends of my scarf. I knew exactly what the message meant. They had finally realized. They had finally read the paperwork they'd been so eager to brandish. And they had finally discovered the settlement they'd fought for, bullied for, and shoved through was written entirely in my favor. I slid the phone back into my coat slowly, savoring the quiet. The truth was simple. Their son had broken my heart. And then his parents had tried to break my dignity. But now the scales had shifted. And the real story, the one that led me to that check, that credit union, that moment of stillness, began long before their frantic text. It began with my name, my age, and the calm I had learned to cultivate after a lifetime of surviving people who underestimated me. And as I unlocked my car, I felt the old memories rising, pulling me backward in time to the moment everything had begun to unravel. Because before revenge comes revelation. And before revelation comes the woman I was. The woman they never expected. The woman I still am. That day at the bank was only the end. Let me take you back to the beginning. My name is Evelyn Hale, and I'm 62 years old. I live in the same New England town where I raised my daughter, buried 2 parents, and learned, sometimes the hard way, that peace is something you must build yourself. No one will protect it for you. People often mistake my calm demeanor for fragility, as though age somehow softens the spine. But time has only sharpened me. I've lived through enough storms to recognize the sky's warnings. I know the tremble in the air before something breaks. And when my former partner Daniel walked into my life 3 years ago with that careful smile of his, I recognized a season changing. At the time, I thought it meant hope. Companionship. A second chance at love in a chapter of life most people believe is already defined. He was 58 then, divorced for a decade, polite in a way that felt old-fashioned. He held doors. He remembered details. He had a laugh that rumbled from his chest. I admit, after years of being content on my own, it was flattering to be seen again. But looking back, I realize now that it wasn't him I fell for. It was the comfort he projected. The idea of a man who could meet me in my maturity without needing to tame me, fix me, or rely on me as a crutch. I wanted to believe that after a lifetime of handling other people's burdens, I could finally share mine with someone who understood. We took things slow. Dinners, walks, long conversations at my kitchen table with tea that went cold. After almost a year, we moved in together. My house, not his. He kept saying he liked the warmth of it better. His parents, Edwin and Margaret Whitman, entered the picture like a cold gust. They were the type who still referred to themselves as old money, though the only thing old about them was their bitterness. Margaret had a way of glancing around a room as if assessing its worth. Edwin had a habit of speaking in questions disguised as judgments. "You're not planning to retire yet, are you, Evelyn? You still manage this home maintenance on your own? You think Daniel is truly happy here?" I learned early in life not to react to people like them. Indifference rattles the arrogant more than anger ever could. But they never liked me. I could see it simmering behind every tight smile. Daniel said they'd soften with time. They never did. Still, for a while, he and I were steady, comfortable. Mature love is not fireworks. It's a slow, steady flame. But even steady flames can flicker. Things changed the week he lost his job. Not permanently, just a restructuring, but enough to bruise his pride. And pride is a fragile thing in middle-aged men raised by people who worship appearance over truth. He grew distant, thin-skinned, quick to snap. And suddenly, every conversation led back to his parents' opinions, their expectations, their nostalgia for the first wife who'd left him in her 20s because she couldn't compete with his mother. I didn't see it then, though I should have. The shift in his posture, the impatience in his voice, the way he started saying, "my house," even though the deed had my name on it alone. I had no idea a storm was building. Until the night it broke open, and my life tipped on its axis. And everything they blamed me for began. Daniel's parents had a way of inserting themselves without ever seeming to be present. They lived 2 towns over, but their influence seeped into my home through every insecurity Daniel carried. I could hear Margaret's cadence in his criticisms. I could see Edwin's narrowed eyes in the way Daniel began examining my choices, my spending, my routines, even the way I organized my pantry. It wasn't sudden. It was erosion. A slow wearing away of what had once felt stable. We'd host his parents for dinner once a month. I'd prepare something thoughtful, roast chicken, lemon risotto, a salad with herbs from my garden. Margaret would always comment on something. "Oh, you used fresh dill? Daniel never liked dill." Or, "This house certainly has character." Or, "You didn't grow up around formal entertaining, did you?" Daniel used to defend me gently. Then he started defending them instead. "You know how my mother gets," he'd say. "She didn't mean anything by it." Or, "They're just trying to look out for me." Sometimes, late at night, "My parents think you don't care enough about our future." At first I brushed it off. I was too old, too seasoned to let the opinions of 2 people who barely knew me shape my peace. But their influence settled into Daniel's bones. And over time, their disapproval became the pulse of our household. My daughter, Lily, visited often. She was 34, sharp-witted, observant, fiercely loyal. One afternoon we sat on my back porch, sipping ginger tea while the clouds moved lazily overhead. Lily leaned in and said quietly, "Mom, he talks to his parents about you like you're a project." I raised an eyebrow. "A project?" She nodded. "Like he needs to fix you. Or prove something. I don't like how he looks at you when they're around. Like he's waiting for their approval." I wanted to say she was reading too much into it. But children, grown or not, sense truths long before adults are willing to name them. The true fracture came during Margaret's birthday dinner. We went to a polished restaurant with white tablecloths and a pianist tucked in the corner. I wore a navy dress, simple and elegant. Daniel had been moody all day, but he insisted we attend. Halfway through dessert, Margaret laid her fork down and said, "Daniel told us you're thinking about early retirement. That's concerning." I blinked. Concerning? I've worked for 40 years. I'm entitled to slow down. Edwin leaned back, steepling his fingers. Retirement requires a stable household. Contributions. Shared responsibility. Daniel tells us his name still isn't on the house. My heart stilled. I looked at Daniel, expecting him to correct them. He didn't. Margaret pressed on. "It's simply not fair to him, Evelyn. He's invested years into this relationship. He shouldn't end up with nothing if things don't work out." The insinuation slid across the table like ice. Lily's warning echoed in my ears. I placed my napkin beside my plate. "I'm not discussing my private assets at your birthday dinner." Margaret sniffed. "We're only trying to protect him." Daniel spoke then, low but firm. "Maybe we should talk about it, Eve. They have a point." It was the use of they that cut deeper than anything. A fault line cracked open inside me. I didn't argue. I didn't dignify their assumptions. But something in me shifted that night. A quiet withdrawal. A preparation for the end I could feel approaching like thunder in the air. Little did I know the real blow would come from a place far more unexpected. And far more devastating. Because the betrayal wasn't emotional. It was financial. And it was already in motion. It happened on a Wednesday. Late summer. The kind of heat that makes the air feel heavy and indecisive. I had come home from volunteering at the library. Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table, elbows planted, staring at a stack of papers. "Eve, we need to talk." The phrase that never means anything good. I set my bag down, rolling my shoulders. "About what?" He pushed the stack toward me. "Legal documents." My stomach tightened. "What is this?" I asked. "Protection," he said. "My parents had their attorney draft something reasonable. It's for both of us." I scanned the first page. A cohabitation agreement. But the language, dense, strategic, cold, outlined financial expectations, contributions, and terms of separation that all mysteriously benefited one party. Not me. In short, if we broke up, he believed he was entitled to a portion of my home's equity, despite never contributing a single dollar to its purchase or upkeep. "Daniel," I said slowly, "this is absurd." "It's not absurd," he snapped. "It's fair." "For who?" "For me," he said. "I moved into your house. I've helped you. I've been your partner." I stared at him. "You've helped me?" "Daniel, I've supported you through job changes, medical bills, and months of your parents' scrutiny. And now you're demanding money that doesn't belong to you." His jaw tightened. "My parents said you'd react like this." And there it was. The truth, sharp as glass. "This isn't about love anymore," I said quietly. "This is about them." He stood abruptly. "Sign it. Let's make things official." "I'm not signing anything drafted behind my back." The air grew electric. He snatched the papers up and spat. "Then maybe we shouldn't be together at all." I didn't cry. I didn't plead. I simply walked to the front door, opened it, and said, "Then go." His expression wavered, shocked, almost wounded, but he left. Not forever. Not yet. But emotionally, that was the moment the relationship died. The next day, Margaret called me. Not Daniel. His mother. She didn't bother with pleasantries. "You broke his heart," she said sharply. "After everything we've done for you." "For me." I laughed quietly. "Margaret, your son tried to take my home. You owe him stability," she said. "He's sacrificed for this relationship." "What exactly did he sacrifice?" "Time," she said coldly. "He could have found someone more compatible." Ah, there it was. The sting beneath the silk. Compatibility meant control. I hung up. 2 days later, I found a letter in my mailbox. Daniel formally requesting a financial settlement for the dissolution of our relationship. They had actually drafted a claim, filed paperwork, demanded compensation for leaving my house. My house. I felt a deep, steady calm settle over me. If they wanted a legal battle, they would get one. But not the one they expected. Because their arrogance had blinded them. And the mistake they were about to make would change everything. And it began with my decision to get answers. Real answers. The first thing I did was call my attorney, someone I trusted, an old colleague from my non-profit days named Rachel Vast. She had a mind like a steel trap and a demeanor calm enough to defuse a bomb. When I told her what Daniel and his parents were attempting, she didn't express shock. She simply said, "Bring everything you have. I'll put on a pot of coffee." At her office the next morning, we spread the documents across her desk. She skimmed, scribbled notes, and eventually leaned back, tapping the top page with her pen. "Evelyn, this is sloppy work. Their attorney rushed this. Parts contradict each other. Sections weren't updated after revisions. And this clause," she pointed to a paragraph halfway down the page. "This gives you entitlement to compensation in the event of separation, paid by Daniel, not to him." I blinked. What? It's badly worded, but yes. They meant to request compensation from you. Instead, they wrote it in your favor. It's legally binding if both parties sign. But I didn't sign. No, she said. But Daniel did. And so did his parents, as witnesses, which they didn't need to be, but their signatures validate the intent. In fact, they strengthened your legal position. They filed this agreement themselves. If we counterclaim using their own paperwork, it becomes enforceable as a settlement. I sat in stunned silence. Rachel's voice softened. "Evelyn, they weren't prepared for someone who would actually read the fine print." I had options. Many of them. Rachel drafted a response. Calm, factual, airtight. We requested a settlement meeting. Their side, confident and arrogant, agreed instantly. 2 weeks later, we sat in a mediation room. Daniel looked worn. His parents sat stiffly on either side of him, like bookends of disapproval. Their attorney, a man who relied heavily on a false sense of superiority, opened the meeting with, "We believe Ms. Hale owes Mr. Whitman fair compensation for the dissolution of their cohabitation." Rachel slid their own signed agreement forward like a playing card in a winning hand. "Actually," she said, "according to your document, Mr. Whitman owes Ms. Hale." Their attorney blinked. "That's impossible." Rachel tapped the paragraph. "Read it." The room grew still. Margaret leaned in, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the clause. Edwin's face paled. Daniel turned toward his parents, confusion morphing into panic. "You said you reviewed this," he whispered harshly. "We did," Margaret insisted. "We did review it. But they hadn't. Not thoroughly." Their attorney read the clause again. Then again. And when he finally looked up, his face had the pinched expression of a man who realized his clients had sabotaged themselves. "This appears to be unfavorable to our side," he admitted. I stayed silent, composed. Rachel continued, "Given that Mr. Whitman has already signed this document and that your client submitted it as a binding proposal, Ms. Hale is willing to accept a negotiated settlement using their numbers." Edwin sputtered, "You're trying to take advantage of us." Rachel's smile was razor thin. "No. You drafted this. You filed this. You initialed every page. We're simply accepting your terms." A silence pulsed through the room. Daniel looked at me then, not with anger, with something closer to regret. But regret is not restitution. The settlement they offered to avoid a trial was more generous than anything I would have dared to request. Desperation does that to people. I accepted. Quietly. Calmly. And as I left the mediation room, their attorney called after us, "We'll issue the check within 10 business days." They did. And that check would soon send them into a frantic spiral. But the turning point wasn't the money. It was the moment I realized I wasn't fighting for revenge. I was fighting for my peace. And I was ready for whatever came next. The morning the settlement check arrived, I held it in my hand for a long moment. Not because of the amount, though it was substantial, but because of what it represented. It was the end of a chapter that had tried to consume me. Proof that dignity, patience, and truth are stronger than manipulation. I set the envelope on my dining table and made myself tea. Chamomile. Quiet. Steadying. I think a younger version of me would have felt triumphant. Vindicated. Even vengeful. But at 62, I felt something different. Relief. A gentleness settling in my bones. I'd already won the moment I chose peace over panic, clarity over chaos. The check was simply the physical evidence. I spent the next few days sorting through the remnants of Daniel's belongings. An old jacket, a handful of tools he'd rarely used, a box of papers he'd never organized. I packed everything neatly, tying the boxes with twine. I left them on the porch with a note, "Please pick up by Friday." There was no malice. Just closure. But closure is rarely mutual. On Thursday evening, I heard the crunch of gravel. I stepped onto the porch to see Daniel's car idling in the driveway. He emerged hesitantly. Older somehow. Or maybe just heavier with consequences he didn't want to face. He gestured to the boxes. "Is this really it?" he asked. "All of it?" "Yes," I said softly. "This chapter is over." He swallowed hard. "My parents. They're furious. They said you manipulated the agreement. That's not true, and you know it." He ran a hand through his hair, exhaling slowly. "I never meant for things to get like this." "Intentions don't erase impact," I said. "You let your parents lead our relationship like a puppet show. You didn't protect us. You didn't even protect yourself." He stared at the porch floor. "I thought they knew best. And look where that got you." A long silence stretched between us. "Do you hate me?" he asked finally. I shook my head. "No. I'm too old to hate anyone. But I've learned not to cling to people who refuse to grow." He nodded repeatedly, as if absorbing each word like a blow. Then he stepped closer, voice low. "You know they're trying to undo the settlement, right? They think they can force you to return the money." I met his eyes. Calm. Unbothered. "They drafted the agreement. They signed it. They filed it. And they paid the settlement." My voice didn't waver. "Their anger is not my responsibility." He looked at me then, not as a man looking at an ex-partner, but as someone realizing the cost of his own choices. "You deserve better," he whispered. "I know," I said. He turned to leave, but paused, gripping the steering wheel. "They're not going to let this go. They never do." "I'm not afraid of them," I replied. And I wasn't. Age teaches a certain kind of courage. Quiet, steadfast, unshakable. The check was already in my possession. But I still had to decide one thing. Would I deposit it? Would I claim the victory they never intended to give me? Would I step fully into the peace I had earned? That night, I sat by my window watching the moon drift above the trees, and I made my choice. A choice that would send shockwaves through the Whitman family. A choice they would never forget. The next morning, I walked into the credit union and deposited the settlement check. No hesitation. No guilt. No second guessing. The teller processed it. I walked out. Simple. But consequences rarely arrive simply, especially for people who believe they're untouchable. 2 hours later, while I trimmed the lavender in my garden, my phone rang. An unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. A second call. Then a third. Finally, a text. "This is an emergency. Call us immediately. The Whitmans." I didn't respond. I had nothing left to say. That afternoon, I received an email. Long, furious, dripping with indignation. Margaret accused me of theft, manipulation, elder abuse, ironically enough, though I was the older one. She threatened to reverse the payment, contact the bank, involve the courts, expose me for exploiting their son's vulnerability. I forwarded it to Rachel. Her response came 10 minutes later. Legally toothless. They have no grounds. Block them and enjoy your day. But they didn't stop. Edwin left a voicemail, voice shaking in rage, as if disbelief alone could rewrite legal documents. Daniel called too, not angry, just defeated. They're unraveling, he admitted quietly. They can't stand losing. That evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, a black sedan pulled into my driveway. I recognized it instantly. Margaret stepped out first, her posture rigid, her pearls gleaming like armor. Edwin followed, face tight with determination. I opened my front door but did not step outside. Margaret marched up the walkway. You need to return the money, she demanded. No, I said. You knew the clause was wrong. I didn't draft it, I said calmly. Your attorney did. You approved it. Edwin jabbed a finger toward me. You're taking advantage of a mistake. No, I said. I'm accepting the agreement you insisted on. Margaret's voice sharpened. You will be sued. Then I'll see you in court, I replied, where the judge will ask why you signed a settlement without reading it. Her mouth opened, closed. She wasn't used to accountability. Edwin sputtered. This isn't how good people behave. I felt something inside me settle, final and unshakable. Good people, I said, don't bully, manipulate, or attempt to seize someone else's home. Good people don't weaponize family. Good people take responsibility. You haven't, and you won't. So this conversation is over. I stepped back and closed the door. Not abruptly, not vindicatively. Just firmly. Through the window, I watched them stand there, stunned. Two people who had never been told no, without shaking the earth to get their way. But the earth didn't move this time. They did. They turned, tight with humiliation, and walked back to their car. That was the real downfall. Not the money. Not the settlement. It was the undeniable truth. Their power had come from intimidation. And I was no longer intimidated. The fallout was quiet, but thorough. Within weeks, word spread through their social circles, not from me, but from their own frantic attempts to explain what happened. People who had once admired their composure began to notice the cracks, the inconsistencies, the bitterness. You cannot hide desperation behind polite smiles forever. Meanwhile, my life settled into something soft again. Peaceful. The kind of peace that feels earned, like sunlight after a storm. I used a portion of the settlement to repair the roof, redo the garden, and pay off the last lingering balance on a loan from years ago. Responsible things. Necessary things. Practical, grounding things. And then I did something just for myself. I booked a trip. 2 weeks on the coast of Maine. A small inn with big windows and the kind of quiet that lets a person hear their own thoughts again. I walked along cliffs. Sketched in a notebook I'd abandoned years ago. Drank coffee on a balcony overlooking the harbor. I felt myself return to myself. Daniel reached out once more, months later. A simple message. I'm sorry. I see everything clearly now. I believed he meant it. I also knew it didn't change anything. I replied gently, I hope you do better with the next chapter of your life. And left it at that. Lily visited one weekend and found me pruning roses in the yard. You look lighter, she said. I am. She studied me for a moment, then smiled. I'm proud of you. Her words landed more deeply than she knew. Age grants wisdom, but approval from those we raised hits differently. It isn't validation, just a quiet confirmation that we've grown in ways they can see. As the seasons shifted, the Whitmans faded from my periphery entirely. Their rage could not cling to someone who refused to hold the other end of the rope. Eventually, they stopped calling, stopped emailing, stopped trying to force an undoing that simply wasn't possible. Truth has a way of settling things. It doesn't always settle them quickly, but it always settles them. One evening, as I watched dusk stretch across my backyard, I realized something simple. This wasn't a victory story. It was a recovery story. A reclaiming. And as I breathed in the quiet, I understood the final lesson that would take me into the ninth and last part of this story, the part one hope stays with whoever listens. Because revenge wasn't the ending. Wisdom was. When people hear a story like mine, they often expect a dramatic moral, a rallying cry, a lesson carved in stone, something sharp and definitive. But life at 62 has taught me that truths worth keeping are quieter. So here is what I learned, and what I hope you take with you. You don't need to destroy anyone to reclaim your life. You just need to stop letting them hold it. The Whitmans tried to control me with fear. Daniel tried to appease them with compliance. In the end, none of it mattered. What mattered was that I stayed steady. I documented everything. I stayed factual, calm, consistent. I trusted my intuition, my attorney, my experience. I didn't match their volume with my own. I simply let their actions reveal themselves. Revenge, true, ethical revenge, is not an act of aggression. It is the unshakable choice to protect your peace. They expected me to crumble. Instead, I stood still while they stumbled. And they stumbled because power without integrity collapses under its own weight. If you're listening to this and facing your own battle, be it family conflict, betrayal, or someone trying to rewrite your worth, let my story be a reminder. You don't need to scream. You don't need to beg. You don't need to wage war. You just need to be certain. Certain of who you are. Certain of what's right. Certain that dignity is stronger than manipulation. When people create their own downfall, let them. When people refuse to read the fine print, literal or metaphorical, let them. When people underestimate your strength because of your age, your calm, your kindness, let them. You don't owe anyone the chaos they demand. Walk your path with clarity. Stand firm in truth. Document everything. And when the moment comes to choose between shrinking to appease someone or rising to protect yourself, rise. Always rise. That, more than anything I endured, is the real ending of this story. Not the check. Not the downfall. Not even the peace that followed. The ending is the wisdom earned. You can't control who tries to break you. But you can control who you let rebuild you. And sometimes the person most capable of rebuilding your life is you. And that is enough. If this story kept you watching, don't forget to like the video, subscribe, and tell me your thoughts in the comments.